This is Amud Yomi Gemara and Shabbos Daf. Ayin Ches Amud Beis, and all the learning has been sponsored as an incredible schos of Refuah Shalema for Miriam Ahuva Bas Esther and Tinoik ben Miriam Ahuva B'siyata D'Shemayim. Today Amud is the 1 week mark. Should bring incredible Yeshuais in Mirza Hashem. Refuah Shalema V'Karayv Schos HaTfilah Schos HaTeira should continue to shake the heavens and be a complete refuah shlema for Miriam Ahuva Bas Esther and Tinoik ben Miriam Ahuva. We're holding at the Mishnah on the bottom of Ayin Ches Amud Aleph. Says the Mishnah, continuing the topic we're talking about, which is the minimum amounts that one is chayiv for carrying out different items in Shabbos. Says the Mishnah, Moiti Chevel. If one carries a rope on Shabbos, Gelas is Oizen Lekupa. Has to be enough rope to carry to make a handle for a basket. Gemi, if he carries out a reed, Tilaso is Talaila Napoli Kivra, enough to make a hanging loop for a sifter or a sieve. Rav Yehuda Omer Teilitu Menu Mida, Midas Minol Lekatan, has to be enough to make, used to use the reed to measure a foot of a child for a shoe, that minimum size of a reed. Niyar, paper, K'teilicht Avalav, Kesher Machsin, to write a tax receipt on it. If you carry out a tax receipt as well, you are chayiv. You are chayiv. Taisus over here deals with chayra that is repetitive, those two statements, and it must be teaching us that once you write the receipt, that creates the chashivas to the paper. Niyar Machuk, as we turn over to today's Amud Ayin Ches Amud Beis, if you take out a race paper, if he takes out enough to wrap around the mouth of a small flask of oil, or high tilasos kameya, to make an amulet, chelef, which is parchment, created parchment, shehi, which is what? Shema Yisrael, Tiyai ink, is 2 letters, kichal, eye paint, ayinachas, put on one eye, devek, luke, delitin b'reisha shavshav, placed in the head of a board, zephes, v'gafris, pitch and sulfur, k'tilasis nekev, enough to make a hole, shaiva, wax, kelitin alpi nekev katan, enough to place on the opening of a small hole, charsis, crushed brick, k'tilasis pikor shel sarfei zav, enough to make the opening of the crucible for those who make gold. Rav Yehuda Omer K'tilasos pitbut, to make a tripod, which is a pot holder. Subin bran k'tilitin alpi kor shel sarfei zav, enough to place the opening of the sarfei zav, the gold refiners. Seid lime, de lasa ketana shababanais, smear on one of the little girls. Rav Yehuda Omer Lasas kalkel, enough to make the hair in the temples. He used to flatten it out, so they would use lime for that. Rav Chaim Omer Kelasod undipi, to smear on the forehead. So says the Gemara, let's begin with the beginning of the Mishnah, which is the case of the chevel, the case of the rope. Says the Gemara, chevel, nami lechayiv, if you take out a rope, you should be chayiv, kivra, which is the second case. Case number 1 was, we said you have to take out enough rope. You have to take out enough rope to make an oizen lekupa, for a basket. Then we said a reed, we said enough to make a loop for a sift or a sieve. So ask the Gemara, what about the rope? The rope, you should also be chayiv if you take out enough to make the loop for the sifter or the sieve. Answers the Gemara, kivan decharik bimana. The rope is thick, is coarse, and therefore it's going to cut into this wooden utensil, it's going to ruin it. Loy avdi inchi, they do not generally use chevel, they do not use rope for the nava v'kivra. Tanarabana, and continues the Gemara, hutzin, more items. Someone takes out palm fronds, kilasos in the sal, kfifas mitzris. They use this item to make the handle for the basket of palm. Sieve, palm bast. He's chayiv if he takes it enough to put on the mouth of a small funnel. Lisanin esayayin, they will put it through to strain the wine by pouring it through. Revav, if someone takes out revav, grease. Is pogin kitana, enough to smear on the bottom of a small wafer, which before they put a little bit of this grease onto the item to make sure it does not stick to the oven when it cooks. The kamishira, how much is that? Kisela the size of a Sela coin. Vatani B'Koigris. Says the Gemara, the Brisa says, has to be as large as a Gregorus, a dried fig. Answers the Gemara, Aid V'Aid Yichad Shi'uru. Moyichin, if someone takes out katin, Tilasos Kadur Katana, you have to get enough to make a small ball of katin. V'kama Shira. How much is that? Ke'agois, the size of a walnut, size of a nut. Niyar, paper, kesher meichsin. So we continue with the next case of the Mishnah. We're smack in the middle of Ayin Chesem and Beis. The Mishnah taught us that when you take out niyar, if you take out paper, it's only if you take out enough to write on it enough to write upon it the tax collector's receipt. Tana, we learned in a brayso. How large is such a receipt? Shtei ois. 2 letters in Greek script, Chsav Yavani, which is a little bit larger than the normal 2 letters. Says the Gemara, take up plain paper, Potter. So it sounds like Shtei ois, not Shtei ois of ois Yavani. Amarav Sheishes, my Shtei ois shell, Kesher Moichsin. 2 letters, that's what it means, of the tax collector's receipt, which are these larger Greek letters. Teretz, number 1 of Rav Shishis. Rava Amar Teretz, number 2. Shteoisis Tidana means 2 of our letters, Ubeisa Chiza, but also has to have enough to hold on to the paper, which is the same size of the Hainu Kasher Moichsin. Meisvei, ask the Gemara, Motini Armachal, you take out a raised paper, Ushtar Parua, or a paid loan document. If on the white part of it, if in the margins enough to write 2 letters, or the entire paper is enough, it's enough to wrap the mouth of a small flask of oil. So says this brisa, it's going to be a kasha on Rav. Because according to Rav Shishis, the Rav Shishis shall catch a meichsin shapir. And the brisa we just quoted makes sense. Why? Because it means it's a little bit larger. It means it's the 2 letters, and the margin is the size, these Greek letters, which is a little bit bigger. Whereas, what did Rava say? No, doesn't mean 2 Greek letters. It means 2 of our letters. And it has a beis achiza. The hainu kasher ma'yisin, which is the same size as a tax collector's receipt. Then it's shver. Hacha beis achiza lo yitzarich. Because here, to hold the document, you shouldn't need it. Why? Because over here, we're talking about niyar machuk. We're talking about a document that has erased portions of it. So therefore, according to Rava, all it should say is a smaller amount. Says the Gemara, indeed, kasha, this is a kasha. Tanu Rabbanon, continues the Gemara. Ha-moiti kasher moichsin. Where 8 lines on the wide lines, if someone takes out a tax collector's receipt, ad shaloheru l'meiches chayiv. If he did not yet show it to the tax collector, then this item has a chashivas, because this is what gets him exempt from taxes. Therefore, he's chayiv. Once he shows it to the tax collector, Potter, he's Potter. Rav Yudaimer. Why? Because he still has a need for the paper. The Gemara is going to explain right now what does that mean. Maybe Nayu says the Gemara. Amar Abaye explains Abaye the runners of the moichsin. That Rav Amar. What's this Rihiti moichsin? So explains Rashi that sometimes you send runners after people to check on them. And therefore, you'd have to prove that you paid. If not, then you'd be asked to be paid again. So Ruda holds that you'd hold your document for this. Where Tanakama says, no, if he gets called upon by this runner, which isn't so common, no, he'll deal with it then. So that's going to be the machlekes, whether you already showed it, it's going to have some chashivas. Whereas Rava Amar Meiches Gadol Meiches Katan, Ika Beinayu, Rav Yehuda holds that even if you already showed it to the Meiches Gadol, the chief guy, you're going to hold it for the Meiches Katan. Whereas the Kama says, again, at that level, we're not worried. Rav Ashi Amar, a third way of explaining, Chan Meiches Ika Beinayu, one tax collector, You need to show it's a second tax collector at another checkpoint. To Amar Legs, you're going to say to him, Chazi Gavra the Meichas, I'm a person that pays taxes. So wait to show that you're a reputable figure and you're not going to have any issues with the law. Says the Gemara Tanur Rabbanan, one last brisa, and with this we conclude. Ha moitzi shtar chayv. I think before when I said we're 8 lines to the bottom, I messed up. We were more like 15. Now we're 8 lines to the bottom of the 2 dots. Tanur Rabbanan moitzi shtar chayv. Someone takes out a shtar chayv. Achla paroi. If he didn't yet pay it, chayiv misha paroi. Once he's paid it, Potter, Rav Yudaim, Rav Mishabar, Chaim, they should hardly need to maybe now you. Rav Yosef. Also, let's just start Parua now. The shaila is you let it hold on to a document once it is paid. Rabbanan Savas should start Parua. Therefore, he's not allowed to hold on to it, and therefore there's no chashivas to it, and therefore you're not chayiv carry it on in Shabbos. Therefore, if you carry it on in Shabbos, you're going to be chayiv. Teretz number 2. Everyone agrees you can't hold on to shtar parua. But over here, if you admit to a shtar that you wrote it, you need to be mekayim it. You still have to be mekayim it, and therefore, according to the Tanakama, at this moment there's no chashivas to it, and therefore for carrying it out you're not going to be chayiv. Whereas if Yehuda Savar, no, and therefore right now there's chashivas to it. And what does the brayso mean? Achla paroi or misha paroi? It's yet paid. It's not yet paid in the top of Vayintezim at Aleph. Ache oimer loy parati uloi parati. So according to the Tanakama, even if you admit that you wrote the document, once he says you repaid it, it's worthless, and therefore you're not chayiv. According to Yehuda, you're going to be chayiv. Rava is going to come along with Rava. Yeah, let's go a job further. Rava Amar, a third way of explaining the brayso. Do you write a shayvar? Tanakama savar kaisvin shayvar. There is a shayvar. Therefore, this document is pointless. So you're not chayiv for carrying it. So this document is very important. So you are chayiv. The last teretz, Rav Ashi Amar, Sheni, to show that he's a reputable guy. We'll pick it up from the 2 dots. Emirza Hashem.